Just to quickly review my role in this process, there's a couple of really important component parts to this that I just want to highlight. It is a consistent regulatory framework. A couple of providers have engaged us and said, well, is there any chance that any of the standards can get lowered? No, because it's a national system, and the intent is to bring providers into a nationally consistent regime. There is a lot of flexibility in the assessment regime for especially Tier 3 providers and takes into account the business circumstances. A lot of Tier 3 providers survive day to day on subsidies from government, and that's their business model, that's their financial sustainability. It could all collapse at any time if those subsidies were withdrawn. At the same time, another Tier 3 might be one of the biggest aged care providers in Australia, multi-billion dollar businesses. So there's a lot of flexibility in the way we approach things, but the standards, the codes that we work to, the evidence requirements are all the same. The other thing that's important on this slide, I'm very much aware of the regulatory burden, and it is part of my role to make sure that that is reduced where I can. We could probably have a bidding war for how much red tape you've got and how many portals you have to open to provide your information to different sorts of regulators. I heard at the break, Sue, you said 20, did you? 20 portals that she has to open as a CEO to provide similar sorts of information as provider. So if you're involved in the disability services or SDA services, homelessness services, CHP World, there's ACNC, non-for-profit sector regulators. There's a whole range of different organisations out there that you need to be subject to that have regulatory oversight. That creates multiple portals, multiple reporting systems. The good news is regulators in contemporary art are trying to work more together with each other and share and reduce that burden. That's an opportunity for red tape reduction. There's also a risk in that we will share information. We will know. So if you're performing poorly in one particular area, other regulators will start to know about that as well and come asking questions. But the benefits there are for the community to reduce some of that regulatory burden. And we provide this level playing field is really important as well. As I mentioned, the objects of the national law don't echo any compliance and enforcement type of approach, which a number of regulatory laws out there do. And you can see it's all about improving the sector and promoting that environment to allow improved government investment and better outcomes for the people in New South Wales. We do operate across jurisdictions. There's about 40,000 assets New South Wales in my jurisdiction for New South Wales based, and about another 4,000 that I regulate that are outside New South Wales. In addition to which I provide operational regulatory services for the Northern Territory and Tasmania under agreements. So it's a quite joined up system, which in itself allows opportunities for businesses to grow and build and access funding across state boundaries as well. I want to get specifically into registration processes. There's actually an object in the Act that points to the function of regulation, and this is what it is. So why am I registering entities? For this purpose. And the opportunity there, as we've been talking about it, getting access to the same level playing field, getting access to the same funding. There's big moves afoot with bond aggregators and so on. If you're part of this community, you get access to a whole range of new opportunities. There are inherent risks to you organisationally, to your own, how do you maintain identity and your own practices and the support services you provide in moving into a broader system. But that's our purpose. And I want to talk then about the national system as well as the local scheme, because I know we've got different organisations here considering entering either of those two schemes. They're opt-in schemes. You have to apply. Traditionally, the way applications work is once you apply, you're always in the system applying. So I've got entities that have been applying to join the national system for a couple of years. And every few months they produce some new documentation which doesn't satisfy the national system, but they're still in the system as applying. So some of the policy rules around management transfers and so on mean I've got to change the way I approach things at the moment. And that is, if you apply and you don't meet the standards, we'll have a very specific conversation about that, and when you need, and what and how you need to improve your capacity, and at what time you can come back and reapply. And I need to be very careful with that sort of language, otherwise we can have people who, yeah, we've applied, we now meet the policy objectives. Yeah, okay, you've been applying for the last 10 years and you still haven't got across the line. So we've got to alter the system a bit, and we've got to be very clear in our communication to organisations about what that queue or what that registration process looks like and means specifically for them. It's not automatic. It's not, I've been PARS registered, so I should be automatically in the national system. There are different rules, standards within it, which you'll need to show evidence that you meet. It does take time, and you'll be able to touch base with a few of the organisations in here that are already nationally registered. It takes time, it takes commitment, and it's not a one-off process. Registration doesn't get you access to funding, then you don't have to worry about it anymore. It's actually a protracted effort. You need to show and build towards compliance, and that will be routinely and regularly assessed, and you need to continuously improve to be part of this system. There's no ACHP category currently in the national system. And we talked about identity, purpose and so on before, and it's something the registrars are actually thinking about. We could create better reporting about Aboriginal service providers within the CHP community. There's just nothing in the system that differentiates. Everyone's a CHP. The other thing to note with any of my registration processes is if there is a history in terms of provider behaviour or failure to meet standards in the past, then I'll be requiring additional lines of evidence to say all of those particular problem areas that I know about have been fixed. And that's doesn't matter who the organisation is and where they come from, what sort of services they provide, or what their business model is. That's an expectation I have of any provider seeking registration under any of these systems. The New South Wales local scheme has been initiated. It is technically up and running. I've received a directive from the Minister that's very clear on the shape of the local scheme. We'll be providing some advice on our updated website next week. We'll relaunch our website next week with information around it, but I'll cover off on some of the basics today. As I mentioned, it picks up this issue of the wind-up clause. There'll still need to be an understanding of what that means on a local area domain. What happens with houses if wind-up does occur, especially if they're owned by Aboriginal Housing Office or government entities, or they have part ownership in it. And it mirrors the national system. So the guidelines to me are very clear. In the first instance, it's about local Aboriginal land councils. It needs to mirror the national system other than that wind-up clause, which means everything else is going to be the same. That black writing might not come over, but I think my slides are going to be in your pack anyway, so you'll be able to see this. Just to give a sense of where my office is going in rolling out the local scheme. We're going to take between now, I'll put out some advice on it next week. Between September and October, we're going to build the IT system that supports portals. So it'll be another portal and engagement for providers to engage with the local scheme. And we'll provide information out on that. over November, December, we'll test and trial that system. We'll go live with the system on the 1st of January. That's in a system sense when the go live is. Obviously, you can engage with my office at any time between now and then. We already have 4 councils who have an ongoing registered interest with us, and we'll be reaching out to them in the next couple of months to ascertain their intent and start working through with them what they need to do to initiate that registration process. Good news is, I think as Sally mentioned, there's no immediate imperative to this, and we're working with the Aboriginal Housing Office to try to give us a scalability over time. If I have 40 land councils come and see me tomorrow to say, can we get registered? I'll say, well, we don't have the capacity to do that, and there's no imperative to do that. Some of you would already received a letter from me saying, just from my own operational resourcing, registration is quite a resource intensive issue for me. We'll try and seek to meet your needs probably in the new year. So some of you might have already received that sort of letter, indication from me. We do have a queue starting to form, so I just ask people to be patient with it, work through it. There's nothing immediate, but if you do have some immediate needs that warrant looking at you earlier, sooner, in more detail, then let us know, because we're pretty flexible with this, how we do this. So we've got 4 providers that will certainly look to register by June 2018, and then we'll rack and stack other land councils from that point onwards. Both systems will have compliance to it. Obviously, the local scheme, the requirement to show compliance kicks in further down the track post-registration. But there's a couple of things to be aware of in considering coming into local scheme or national scheme. I've got these functions which translates into compliance outcomes. We want to be a better practice regulator. In a contemporary models of regulation, the scheme itself is a self-regulated scheme. Self-regulation means the organisations themselves and their peak bodies work out what the risks are, work out what the mitigations are, work out the response strategies, and invest in their own better outcomes and invest in better practice. And the regulator sits outside that, guides, reports, monitors performance, and doesn't get involved on a day-to-day of setting controls and issuing notices, etc. So that's the way the scheme works, and it works very well, as we talked about in the last session, about improving performance and promoting better practice. We do have these compliance components, but we do use them more to encourage better practice rather than take action against organisations. It's not a It's not a schedule-based system. There is schedules within it, but you're expected to show performance measures all the time, and we will be touching base with you along the way to ask questions about why things are happening. And as I said before, we do have these enforcement powers. We use them to ascertain the truth, to seek improved compliance, and to respond to the reputation of the sector. So we do take action against organisations who aren't performing at levels comparable to their peers, and the peer group in each of these systems expects that of other participants in the system, and the registrar is party to taking those organisations and getting them to perform to better practice, and we can take enforcement action through that, through not achieving those levels of better practice. So next steps, I'll just echo Sally's point. There are a whole range of capacity building. You have capability in place. There are capability development activities, projects that you need to improve, but capacity to access an expanding sector and link in with broader government initiatives. There are mechanisms in place through the Federation. We'll be party to that. We'll have individual conversations with organisations about specific parts of their capacity, and there'll be general capacity building initiatives as well. Take advantage of those, take your time. The time imperative is not there to do things today. The time imperative now is to pursue what level of capacity we want to be, what's the direction of the organisation, how can we create sustainability, viability in a way that we can tick that national consistency box. That's it for me in this session. Thanks.